Hi everyone to this session on translated poetry. We're going to be looking at different kinds of translation when it comes to poetry and how it impacts how we view it and to poetry itself. So, translation opens doors for poetry to cross borders, enabling readers to experience the beauty of words from diverse cultures and languages that they would not previously have been able to access. However, when poetry is translated, it does face a lot of fascinating questions, like what gets lost or altered in the process of translation? How do the cultural and linguistic nuances and structure change the poem's meaning, and how are they changed as you translate? Today we're going to be looking at some of these questions, and we're going to be looking at few of the world's most famous poems translated from various languages to English. So when reading poetry, and when reading translated poetry in particular, there are many kinds of questions you can ask that to deepen your understanding of the poetry that you're reading and also how the translation has impacted it. For instance, how does the original language influence the tone or rhythm of the poem? How do the cultural differences impact the imagery or themes? And does the translation preserve the poem's emotional depth or its nuance that is uniquely in its language? Also, what language is this translated from, and how does this impact the words in this poetry? For example, if you're looking at an East Asian language like Chinese or Japanese, you can kind of guess that there are nuances in the languages that are used to talk to adults or figures that you respect because they use a different grammatical structure to talk to adults. So these kind of nuances can be altered as you translate, and these questions will definitely guide you as you explore the different meanings of the poems we look at today. Okay, the first poem we're going to be looking at is O Snail by Kobayashi Isa. The poem goes, O snail, climb Mountain Fiji, but slowly, slowly. Yeah, it's very interesting, right? It exemplifies kind of the simplicity and kind of the elegance characteristic of Japanese poetry and haiku. Haikus often use nature and animals to convey a larger philosophical or didactic meaning, and this poem also does that. The snail's kind of slow ascent becomes a metaphor for our own perseverance and patience in our own lives. And these kind of values are deeply embedded in Japanese culture as well. The compact of nature in the Japanese language allows a lot of depth in only a few words, but even in translation, this poem kind of retains its profundity. So here again, you can look at the answers for these questions. Can you guess which language this is translated from? Japanese, right? How might have the language and cultural settings affected this piece? Well, the haiku and the kind of nature context in which a lot of the haikus are written have an impact on the kind of poetry that we see in English. Okay, now let's go on without the guiding questions. Here is another poem. Here is the poem in English. The wind one brilliant day said to me, do not complain, others have been happy. In Spanish, the original lines feature rhythms such as brillante and quejes and felices, and alliterations of the same sound like los ojos and los otros, like the O sounds. These elements can create a musicality and a rhythm that enhances the poem's tone that is just not, that cannot be replicated with the same meaning in English. But Antonio Machado's poem, written in Spanish, also has a deeply profound message that we can still understand in English in its brevity and powerful self. Do not complain, others have been happy. Right? This highlights how translations can still maintain the same thematic kind of resonance, even if the stylistic elements are altered and not all the rhythms and not all the lyrical and linguistical geniuses can be preserved. Here's another one. Autumn by Rainer Maria Rilke. In English, it goes, Autumn is a second spring where every leaf becomes a flower. This captures the beauty of transformation and it uses nature as its reference. In German, in the original poem, it uses alliteration like herbist and Wut. I am sorry I pronounced that wrong, but they are alliterations in in German, and this emphasizes again the lyrical quality. And the German language itself is it's very concise, and it allows Rauch to express profound ideas with very, very brief words. The English translation does convey the same kind of theme of beauty and change, and it is also very, very, very short, describing autumn as a second spring where every leaf becomes a flower. And but and despite like slight differences in phrasing, the emotional and philosophical core of the poem still remains in the English translation. Yeah, now let's look at a Chinese poem. Li Bai's classical Chinese poem reflects the poet's longing for home. The moonlight shines brightly in front of the bed, suspected to be frost on the ground. Look up at the bright moon, lower your head, and miss your hometown. The original Chinese version uses a parallel structure and concise imagery, such as this first line, the moonlight shines brightly in front of the bed. It kind of has this five-line kind of shape, and it has a very, very parallel structure even in its theme. The Chinese characters also carry layered meanings, which is to say that one character may say a lot of things at once, and these are challenging to replicate in translation. However, the English version still retains the poem's emotional essence, conveying the poet's yearning for home and for the connection, and the kind of imagery with the moonlight and the frost. Okay, let's move on to The Dunes by Pervet. That pronunciation was probably very wrong, but in French, Pervet is as follows on the right, and in English it is: the dunes has stars in his eyes, he dreams, he dreams, he dreams, he has wings at his feet, he wants to fly, but he is nailed to the earth, and his head full of clouds. This in French, it uses a lot of repetition and smooth, like, syllabic flows to create, like, a whimsical but also a pretty strong rhythm. And the original poem repeats this line, he dreams, he dreams, he dreams, and employs, like, a pattern of short, very evocative lines to reflect, like, the wonder and frustration that is compact in this poem. While the English version kind of captures the thematic essence of a child's yearning and breaking free from conformity, it does lose a lot of the rhythmic quality that Pervet uses in French. And this, again, reminds us that certain auditory effects are inevitably altered and also effaced during translations. Here is another one. This is a translation from Greek. We see Constant P. Cavafy, the god abandons Antony. In English, it goes, when suddenly at midnight you hear an invisible procession going by with exquisite music, voices, don't mourn your luck that's failing now, tasting the bitterness of the seasoned end. Don't mourn the gods abandoning you, who have always been your home. This is a very steep historical and cultural reference to the fall of Mark Antony, and this original use is deeply embedded in the Greek tradition, and it also uses a formal tone in the Greek language and has precise diction, and it's very evoking of the kind of grandeur of classical antiquity even within the language. The English translation captures the poem's themes of loss and dignity and the idea of God, but it does not fully replicate the kind of richness of Greek's nuanced phrasing. And this also is the case with a lot of the famous epic poems that we know of, Iliad and Ulysses, ones that are written in ancient Greek by Homer. Although it is translated by the best English writers, it's just the nature of the languages itself, it just does not allow the same kind of nuances to be translated. And so these poems kind of show us how, these important themes, in this case, kind of the bittersweet acceptance of change and the kind of, and the god of power and how it is dealt, but it has to inevitably at some point fall short and not give us the full meaning that the Greek original text had. Okay, let's look at the last one, In the Middle of the Road by Carlos Drummond de Andrade. This is a Portuguese Brazilian poem. And in English, it goes, "In the middle of the road, there was a stone. There was a stone in the middle of the road. There was a stone in the middle of the road. There was a stone." Yeah, this is a very, very, very profound modern poem. And it emphasizes the stone in the middle of the road to emphasize the obstacles in life. And these Portuguese kind of lends a musicality and rhythm to the poem. And I think this is kind of captured pretty well in this translation, actually, because the stone in the road, it kind of has a repetition of the middle of the road. There was a stone, and the stone was in the middle of the road. I think this is actually translated pretty well. And the thematic idea of persistence in the face of challenge is also shown, and it's very, very interesting. This was a very well translated poem, and so these kind of feats, these kind of translation of nuances is also possible. Yeah, so as a recap, let's get a few takeaways from the translated poetry. Translating poetry, I think, is as much of an art as it is a science. It's not about literally translating which words by definition and which kind of words have the same repetition and alliteration. It's also about kind of how we can translate it to make our work resonate with new audiences worldwide. And understanding the cultural and linguistic nuances, it enriches our appreciation of these poems, and it just bridges the gap that we have between languages and reveals the universal truths about human experience that all these poems can share. Because fundamentally, regardless of what language we're speaking in, we're all speaking the language of humanity, and all our poems are going to be talking about humans. Yeah, so in conclusion, translated poetry, they really remind us of just the power of language, and allows us to connect worldwide across cultures and times. And each translation is a unique interpretation, and it just sheds light on the kind of shared emotions and ideas that all of us united have. Yeah, and I want you to try your own translated poetry. I've made some option. Option A is writing a poem in English and then translating it to another language. See how it sounds, how the structures may change, and how the contents even change. Option B is writing a poem in a second language and then translate it to English if you can speak it. Observe how the sounds, the structures, and the content vary according to each language. Yeah, thank you so much, guys. I hope this inspires you to explore these works further and reflect on how translation is really shaping our understanding of art and poetry. Thank you so much for accompanying me on this journey, and I hope you have a great day.